FOAID basically wanted us to talk about something that either students or younger practices could relate to, and it would help them build their own sort of enterprise going forward. So in our studio, we're essentially a collaborative practice. We're 4 of us, 3 women and me, so I'm severely outnumbered there. And then Iram is on their team as well. But essentially, that's a question every time we're having a discussion in the studio, in the conference rooms, anything about, we normally come together and the design process is more discussion oriented. People throw ideas out there. There are client briefs which are discussed, and so there's something that we constantly, every time, you know, someone who's new to the studio or even some of the older people are putting forth ideas, there is this sort of consistent sort of dilemma, right? So when you start a blank slate, you know, whether it's a canvas as an artist, or we're all on our iPads nowadays more, so maybe it's a flat pad device or a sheet of tracing. It's always hard to put that first line. It's always hard for everyone, including us even today. Where do you start? You know, what's your starting point? So I decided to sort of try and you know, talk to you guys about what we encourage people in our studio to take up as a stand when they're approaching this. So step 1 is, you know, back in the days we would reach out to our libraries, you know, pull out reference books. Like Amir was saying earlier, you know, go to Pinterest, stalk a bunch of other designers. You know, it's a fantastic way to create mood boards. I'm not saying we don't use that. We do end up doing that. You go to Instagram and see what other people are doing. But at the end of it, I still feel, and so as much as we do use this, we try to discourage it or limit it. I think what tends to happen every time you look at someone else's work, it stays in your head. There's an imprint of it somewhere in your memory, and you tend to repeatedly draw that same idea. And knowing very well that you don't want to copy it, you don't want to literally appropriate someone else's thought process, you want to be inspired by it. So there's a fine line you kind of are constantly treading where you want to be inspired and acknowledge that there was inspirational value in that other person's work, but you don't want to rip it off, whether they sue you or they don't sue you. But you know, so fundamentally you try to adapt it, whether, you know, you change materials, you change scale, you change, you know, you dilute the effect, things like that. But eventually all these thoughts, they kind of, you know, they tend to control your design language, and they become the building blocks for what you eventually sort of put out there as your design. It's kind of like this. So if you look at this, I don't know if you guys have seen this movie, but it's kind of this whole community of people who've left Earth, allowed it to regenerate, and Wall-E is, I mean, I hope enough, that light is killing, but I'm going to step away from the light, but shit, it follows me. Okay, but fundamentally what my thought process was that in this, they literally, it's everyone is living a particular life based on this slot that is created for them, and they're towing the line. So something that helps you to step back is actually just delete all the images from your head for a minute, and like Iram is saying, make the client the hero of your story, right? So you understand from them what their sensibilities are, what their idiosyncrasies are, and each one of us are equally unique, equally weird, equally sort of filled with bad or good habits. You actually draw upon that, and typically what we've kind of realized is that this becomes actually a generator of ideas. So we have one client which is, anyway, Apu's husband, but basically he came out that if you're doing my house, I want to be able to step out of the shower and, you know, dry myself. I don't want to use a towel, right? So you'll bump into absurd things like this, but absurd things like this becomes requirements, you know. So I'm going to run you through a couple of ideas that came out of client interactions like this. They're more interior driven, not so much architectural driven, but it's kind of not a brief which is given to you that this is what I want, but it's kind of a brief that you understand based on the site and the context and things like that. Also, I know we're in Delhi, which is the land of, you know, kothis and things like that, while Bombay is basically a city of slums. So since we come from a city of slums, I think the architects tend to focus on optimizing every square inch, every square centimeter of space, because it's an arm and a leg, right? So you sell a kidney to buy a square foot of land. But so little things like this. So this was a small little cavity which we had. So this is actually a small cavity, right? And everyone is, including the design fraternity as well as the clients, are all bombarded with imagery on Pinterest and Instagram. So everyone has aspirations, everyone has a need, and everyone wants a walk-in wardrobe and a really grand space. So towards that end, this was someone who wanted a walk-in wardrobe for bookshelf, for books, shoes, and bags. But we only had this little cavity. So your typical sliding shutter would kind of, move along the line of the channel. So we kind of decided to take the channels this way and just slide it open. So we did a double-sided cabinet, which is sort of manually hand-driven, and it just pulls open. Of course, there's also this sort of massive glass wall. So, but anyway, so that's the bookshelf, and you pull it open, and it reveals basically a walk-in space where you can go in and your shoes and your bags are kept. So this is something else which, again, plays into the same thought process. But again, like, it's constant evolution, right? So that was a project we did 3 or 4 years back, I think. This is something that is still upcoming at this point. Again, a similar story. You have a decently sized room, so it's not a small room, but there's a nice balcony to it. There's a fantastic view on that side. Having said that, you still want more space. Also, more and more, I think Shobhan prompted me about this point, but basically, throughout the pandemic, we've kind of realized that designing spaces which are monofunctional is kind of redundant now. There's definitely a need for spaces to constantly adapt and change. So when you think about large spaces like walk-in wardrobes, typically you'd use it for maybe an hour or 2 in a day. And we're also strong believers that, washrooms and wardrobes and bedrooms kind of need to be more like thought of as one space. So what we kind of have done here is we've taken the same idea, what I showed you here, in a larger scale. So there's this about 10-foot wardrobe, which is about 11 feet high, and it's kind of moved on motors to go and meet with the side table, and the television is mounted on it. So this is the way in basically you get about 4.5 feet of space additionally within your wardrobe area. And also similarly, you have a massive sort of 9-foot door here, which slides behind the bookshelf. So it allows essentially that whole space to feel like one when you need it, and you still get your walk-in wardrobe when you want to. The study table is kind of designed so it's floating off. That's kind of just a rough, sketchy view of that, sort of just to explain to the client how the wall will move. That's it in action, the mock-up being made. And it's motorized, so these guys were talking about collaborations and creations, and this is basically actually a motor which is used to reel in. It's like a tow chain steel cable which is pulling it along with tracks and gears. So it's kind of like a homemade production. But there's a good way to kind of, so what happens is that becomes a clue again. But yeah, so this is another site in Calcutta done a couple of years ago. Again, didn't think of using the wardrobe at that point. So we've got a corridor coming in, but the bathroom is completely sort of landlocked, and the client was very fixated on having a large amount of natural light everywhere. But site limitations don't let you do that in this case. So what we kind of did is we took this entire wall, which you can see, I'm ballparking, it must be at least 12 feet, kind of slides into the other bedroom wardrobe, right? So it goes into the back of there's the parents' bedroom, I think. Yeah, it is the parents' bedroom. And that's that. So again, leading into collaborations is actually an idea which I saw at Design Matrix. It's in Zubin and Ruby and Suli's office, and they've done this little panel which has the little bending of wood and splicing of wood to create a sort of visible form. So I requested him for the detail of it, and then based on that, we just tweaked it a bit and added a light element to it to kind of further amplify that form. And the way it is that the light keeps moving and sliding, and your entire sort of washroom opens up to your bedroom like that. Again, this is an 11-year-old boy, Ranbir, thank you. And he was the client's son, and every time he would come for these meetings, and he was actually a participant in the discussion, he would constantly have blank paper and he'd be doodling and sketching. So Ekta was actually doing this project, and she just picked up on that clue. So it's not always about a design brief, it's also about observing your clients very closely. So in this case, we sort of requested him to do doodles on an A3 sheet, I think, or 2 A3 sheets if I recollect. And then we sort of took this entire doodle of his and got it printed and made it a wallpaper in his room. And it's just, he's super house proud, right? It's a simple sketch, it's a simple wallpaper, there's no rocket science in it, but it's personal. It kind of, so you're not sort of adapting a Pinterest image or another person's idea. You're actually using your client to generate clues, which you're then creatively sort of engaging with them in. This is actually an interesting story. So also part of the whole multi-use of spaces. So this was a client actually who 75 years old at that point, and had a serious back injury while he was in his late 30s, but an absolute serious movie addict. He would have Shimaru, for those in Bombay. It's a video library, right? So they would send video cassettes to him. He would not even know which movies. They would just make sure that it was part of the collection which he'd not seen. So they would just keep sending him 2 or 3 or 4 DVDs and CDs. Now, of course, that was before content. But so effectively, but he could never watch TV at a long stretch, no matter what recliner, which brand sofa was given to him. So this was something that we came up with almost 8 years ago. And we put we put a projector and we put the screen on top of it. We had to eliminate the fan. It kind of pulled out of his bedside drawer, but it became a cool feature. We never used it again because we didn't find any other client who had a really serious back injury. So it becomes a unique solution. It becomes something which is not done before. Again, this is something which is observed where this is a standard thing, like around the world you have heated floors. For some reason in Delhi and Kanpur, cooler areas, I don't think it's that prevalent yet. There is some amount of radiant cooling which we've done for an apartment in Ahmedabad, for a bungalow in Ahmedabad. But this came out because we just observed that we'd done one house for the client. The client would walk barefoot and he'd constantly keep freezing. So he'd try and, while talking, he'd move to the rugs and stand on a carpet or a rug or something. But he was not comfortable wearing slippers and shoes in the house. So when we did his next house, we kind of just did a heated floor for him. So these are all things which, again, it may not be a solution which fits for everyone. Again, site and context plays a huge role in determining what you're able to even ideate, correct? So this is a site which kind of starts up at 23 meters there. It's located in Goa, of course goes down to the ocean here. So it's a fantastic site. It's kind of super dense in terms of its trees. The client had the option to buy a site which was, buy another plot which was kind of right adjacent. There are 5 plots in a row which are flatter. We requested him that this was the best bet for him, and he was not sure how and where we'll build. So then kind of, because when you look up at 23 meters, the root of 23 meters is kind of eating into my 16-meter floor plate. So pretty much it's kind of a challenge to build anything without cutting trees. So what we did is we tapped into a local landscape architect, used his sort of know-how, got a survey lever to map all the trees along with the foliage, the bark, and then guesstimate the root diameter that a tree of that species would need. We modeled that. And then we sort of arrived at a footprint, which is kind of like this. So it kind of goes based on the height is what it's going to be. So that's going to be a whole other story. This is again a small thing where this kid had this obsession with Bob the Builder and dumper trucks and stuff like that. So this was a site that we worked on, and this became basically a perforation within his curtains. So he consistently has this sort of city structure at his background. Now these are small graphic clues, but they add personalization and sort of flavor to the house or the homes that we work on. In terms of inspiration, I think someone earlier asked this question, like where do you get your ideas from? I think everyone sitting here, whether they're a practicing architect or a student, will agree that inspiration kind of can be found anywhere and everywhere. There are enough larger examples of it. I'm just going to dwell through a couple of examples where we have been inspired by different designers, different products across the design profession. So be it graphic design, be it an artist. So I'll run you through a few of them. Okay, sorry, yeah. So this is something where we were inspired by the view. So it was a site. This is Eravat, which is the whole basis of this was we were framing these views. So the house got oriented based on that. but honestly, after that, when you look at the plan, this is the aerial shot of the house. And in retrospect now, so this is, I'm talking about retrospect, one could basically go back and say it's, from the Avengers logo. Or maybe we inspired the Avengers logo. No, we did. But kind of, that's the thing. But fundamentally, what I was trying to get at is that a lot of us think 2D, 3D. I know Shantanu plays with graphics, and you kind of flatten out dimensions. But this is something that there was a Patricia rug, which is obviously a two-dimensional design, and we're constantly playing with dimension, right? You sketch something, it's in 2 dimension, but sometimes you're trying to make it a perspective. That's something that has interested us for the last few years, and we're constantly dabbling around with it. So a couple of the examples which you see will repeatedly display that. So we kind of have this sort of band running. So it's not an exact copy, but this is what sparked that sketch. This is something that I have, I've always been in awe of this lady's work. It's Libs Elliott. She does quilts, like kambal, right? So it's a very, but she does it beautifully, and she plays a lot with patchwork and quilting and methods of folding fabrics. And I've been stalking her on Instagram for the last maybe 3 odd years. But up until recently, it never connected in my head. But we're doing this massive sort of office space, and we decided to play around with kota there. So simple Indian stone, very cheap, low budget. But this kind of, so I wrote to her and I said, look, I love what you've done for this particular quilt, and is it okay if I use it as a flooring pattern? And she was quite flattered by it, and she was happy to let me use it. But I just think this is the kind of inspiration that you'll draw. This is again something else. It's an installation done by Sarah. Sorry, there are 3 people, Adrian and Michael. So bumped into this, saw it, loved it, had no clue what will I do with it ever, right? It was just something at the back of your head. And then when we're doing this sort of boardroom table, and it's become this sort of, either we'll do it in Tarkashi or we'll do it in marquetry work, but it became sort of this massive boardroom table. So it's not a little adaptation, but it's kind of something that inspired us to do this graphic. Again, a simple font. So it's just the style of a font, but that's what we're kind of developing. So you don't have a name board outside the house. This is the elevator lobby of a house we're doing in Calcutta, and you step out of it and you see the name is Atha. So again, different. So typography is also, sort of a possible thing. Rugs, of course, nowadays we're all designing rugs. But this is actually a rug by someone else, again, I'm trying to remember and read the names. Someone can pronounce this better than me, baby. But Portego. And so this has basically led to, again, a kind of fluting thing, which kind of is the perspective. So when you stand at a particular perspective there, you can see that sort of 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional play. There's the rug. So this is a rug we did with Cocoon. Ekta worked on this, and that's actually the Airavat aerial shot which inspired the design for the rug. So again, multiple things. So your drawing feeds your rug feeds your drawing. It's kind of, what I'm trying to basically say is that you can work off any inspiration. It just has to connect with you. Escher has inspired generations of architects, I think, and it's phenomenal. So that's actually someone who's done a coaster. So the point is that, one of the kids in the studio saw this coaster and said, oh, this is phenomenal. I led it back to saying, okay, this is where the clue must have come from. Eventually, Shweta kind of came up with this thought that there's a particular point where you stand, and it's kind of, the step is kind of on the floor, goes onto one wall and turns onto the other wall, and that end kind of bleeds into a mirror. And of course, there's a light hanging here, which is the monkey light. But broadly, so when you're standing at a particular vantage point, it's a 3-dimensional space, but it looks like a flat 2D space. This is a London Art wallpaper, which again is similar to that. So if you saw the previous one, so sometimes you'll see a repetition where it's a wallpaper is inspiring a carpet, the carpet is inspiring you to do something else. That's the long and short of it. Thank you.